Alan texted in, commenting on this totally unnecessary debate of the day today, which is, again, are you and your spouse or significant other closely aligned on money issues? And you can vote on this over at twitter.com/Brian Gongol Show. Your choices are A, we're completely unified, B, some minor tiffs, no big deal, C, we're in different places, or D, we are like different species when it comes to money. Alan texted in to say, seems like in highly educated circles, marriage is more like a business trip than a pleasure cruise. I don't know if that's entirely true, but at least it's a clever way of putting it, so I appreciate that. I think it's the alignment is really good, and you know, I don't know if you happened to catch this, Emery. We were chatting about this mismatches in the marriage market. These Cornell University researchers thinking there's a problem for eligible women in the dating pool because their married friends are marrying people who are, you know, sort of comparable to them in educational and economic status, and there aren't similar men available in the dating pool to these single women, which is leaving them either unmarried or, I don't want to use the word settling, but maybe making decisions that otherwise might change their economic status for the worse. So I don't know. I just, you know.
You know, we have lived in a pretty, you know, it's not been the exact same, but I would imagine throughout the years of the history of this great country and our economy that the socioeconomic situation between men and women has been fairly similar to the point where guys make X dollars, women make Y dollars, and if you compare them properly, I mean, one of them is probably settling. If you're worried about that, why all of a sudden has that become a preventative measure for marriage?
Interesting.
That's my theory.
Interesting question.
30 years ago, I'm sure that there were still women who felt like they were settling. Is it the social media now that everybody's super visible?
Could be.
People know more than they used to know.
Now you see your friends taking a vacation in Cancun. You're like, why am I not getting a vacation?
They're doing a lot better than us, right?
Right.
You know, it's an interesting. You know, and I'm a man, and I'm trying to go to bat for my fellow man. And I feel like my wife settled for me in a certain aspect, but at the same time, I also feel like there's more to the whole getting married to someone you love thing than your socioeconomic status.
Right. Well, and that's why I say it's totally unnecessary debate. We don't have to get worked up about this.
Those are facts, though.
That question.
It's a fact that marriage is down, and the people and the women they talked to said, I don't want to settle.
What's happening. Exactly. Now, speaking of people who are settling for things, this is why I wanted to bring in. Now, this is the voice of Emery Songer, as you may hear mornings here on WHO with Van and Bonnie. But I wanted to bring him in because Emery is our well-known and reputed sports expert around here at WHO. You're big into this stuff.
I'm big into this stuff.
Real big into this stuff.
Real big.
So I felt like you might have feelings on this question of the state of California, where the House and the Senate have now both approved bills that say that college athletes, that, you know, these student athletes can now go out and get agents to represent them for endorsement deals. Now, they might not be charging the university to play, but they would potentially be able to benefit if, say, they show up in a video game or something like that. You know, a merchandise, they could then benefit from their names and likenesses getting used. It's interesting because now they've got to reconcile the bills, right? They've got the House and the Senate have both passed them. They've got to reconcile, and then they've got to put it through and see if the governor signs it. Sounds like that may be up in the air. This is a really interesting story, right? I mean, if California does this, that's huge.
This is a gigantic story.
Yeah.
For a lot of different reasons. First and foremost, you did a good job explaining that the schools would not be paying the athletes.
Right.
These would be athletes that if they wanted to go sign autographs on a poster and sell them for $10 a piece to fans and take photos and have a meet and greet, or like you said, endorsement deals, shoe deals, any of that stuff. And USC running back has, you know, his jersey hanging up in the local sports shop. He can get a little bit of that change that's being sold when his jersey's there.
Right.
That's what this is. This is a big deal for a lot of different reasons. I kind of try to compare the athletes being paid to sports gambling. Sports gambling has been happening forever. Basically since sports became a thing, guys have been gambling on them, whether it's
likely
legal or illegal.
Right.
And it wasn't until this year that we in Iowa now have legalized sports gambling.
Right.
It basically changes the route that we do it, but we still probably spend as much money doing it as we did before. It's just through different avenues.
So, I mean, it would have been possible even to do it legally if you had gone to Las Vegas at some point, left a chunk of money there.
Right.
You know, you could have done it remotely, and that was complicated. Now you just maybe just do it here, like
now,
Prairie Meadows.
The reason I make that comparison is that with college athletics now, there's a 0% chance that the top athletes in these gigantic schools have not been getting paid by somebody for their services. Pretty much 100% of what's not found out by the NCAA, they call bagmen. Like every school's got a few bagmen who, the athlete needs $500 for this, or, hey, if you want me to come play for Auburn, you better chuck over $100,000, and the bagmen find ways to go back behind certain avenues and make sure that kid gets money without being traced with a paper trail to the university.
Like suddenly dad's got a job working selling cars and he doesn't show up 3 days out of the week.
Correct. Yeah. Or the kid all of a sudden is driving a very nice vehicle that you would expect
fell off the back of a truck
not to really have an opportunity to afford.
Right.
That stuff has been happening forever. But the NCAA has been trying to regulate that because they don't want schools to have certain recruiting advantages over other schools. Well, this creates a gigantic snafu in that. Because also amateurism is something the NCAA reputedly likes. The NCAA profits on all these athletes.
That's the thing.
Why on earth would the athletes get a chance to make money on themselves, right?
Right.
So I personally think that the NCAA, to some extent, is fairly crooked, and that's just a different conversation. But they're saying, look, if California passes this, and institutions like Stanford, UCLA, and USC, like the big-time collegiate programs, Division I programs in California, and they're cool with that too.
Right.
And this starts happening because you said it unanimously. I mean, the legislature in California feels strongly enough, bipartisan-wise, that unanimously this was passed.
Right.
If this goes through, Brian, then the NCAA says, well, USC, UCLA, Stanford, you're not going to be invited to our tournaments.
Which is huge.
Nothing you do will be sanctioned by us.
Right.
But will that stop them? Because, yes, it will give them an incredible recruiting advantage. Any kid that is a high-profile athlete that wants to immediately start making money on his or her name,
of course,
they can go to California, play for UCLA, whether it's basketball, football. Heck, if you're a good track and field athlete, Nike wants to sign you on the spot while you're a collegiate athlete. That hasn't been able to be done before. Now it possibly could be done.
Right.
Kids are going to want to go there for that reason.
Right.
But if this does happen in California, this is a huge tipping point because Texas has to start. Well, if California doesn't care about the NCAA repercussions and all the kids going there, well, Texas A&M, Texas Tech, Baylor, they got to start getting together and say, hey guys, we're losing some athletes to California that we weren't losing before because of this. And then all of a sudden, well, the New York schools are going to be, we got to worry about Florida State. Oh, God.
I would think the whole SEC would just bolt for the door the minute California would do this.
Alabama could just be cherry-picking guys. Well,
yeah.
Now we're losing some of our 5-star recruits to USC because those kids can immediately start making money on their likeness. We got to fix this. The Clemson kids in South Carolina. Guys, we got to fix this. We're losing some kids to California and Texas and Florida because they started doing this. It is going to create that pressure that we saw with the sports gambling, that an overwhelming decision is going to have to be made to put everything back on equal ground. What the Democratic governor, Gavin Newsom, does here, if he signs this bill into law and the big schools in California are okay, they think this is a good idea, I think it's a matter of time before you see the overarching United States of America with major college programs, including the state of Iowa. I think it's a matter of time before everybody starts saying, look, we got to do this too, because we can't compete for recruits and try to get kids to play in our athletic programs. And, Brian, let's be honest, this just makes sense. The kids should have the ability to profit off their own likeness. And I think it's a good compromise that the school doesn't have to pay them more than the scholarship. It's just appearances or endorsement deals. It makes a lot more sense to me this way instead of the school giving them a salary stipend.
Do you think this breaks the NCAA monopoly on amateur sports? I mean, if this actually happens, if California breaks off, they've got to have some kind of organizing group. If they're kicked out of this, they'll form, the California Athletic Association or whatever, right? And then the CAA, maybe that becomes a competitor, a rival, and they have their own national tournaments. Because, like you say, Texas will want in, Florida will want in, New York will want in, maybe the whole SEC leaves or something.
Yep.
Well, if that happens, if that goes down, boy, that's a radically different environment than we've had.
The NCAA, if this happens, they're basically making threats now. How does the NCAA benefit if Texas and Florida and New York schools also decide that, well, if we're going to try to, we can make this compromise if it means that our schools are still getting a ton of kids. And
right.
Not only that, but we're competitive in sports. And on top of that, we're going to be able to make the revenue that we generate on football and basketball. Well, the NCAA can't just sit there and be like, oh, all right, Florida, you're out too.
Right.
Oh, all right, Texas, you're out too. Well, you're putting yourself in a bind there if you're the NCAA. So I think they're being very loud right now and saying, you better not do this because you won't get to be a part of our games and our tournaments and all this good stuff anymore. But if they say, well, we don't care, and we're going to make this move to do this, then I think the NCAA has to backtrack real quick and try to make some exceptions to the amateurism that they continue to say that they uphold and be able to share in the revenue with the student athletes.
Well, and that brings up a question here. Jeff in Marshalltown just texted in to say this would be the end of non-revenue sports. Do you think it is? I mean, does that crack everything if football kind of does its thing? Because we're talking about football and basketball to some extent. I mean, I'm guessing there are not a lot of endorsement deals if you're the javelin thrower,
Yeah, I don't think it does. Football and basketball well known to be the money makers on campus, and the money that they generate also helps to keep the track and field programs, the lacrosse programs, the field hockey programs, the swimming programs alive and well. There are definitely ways that the schools benefit by having kids like this on campus, giving them athletic scholarships to be in these sports, but it also helps them with numbers, right? I went to William Penn University. The reason that they have record numbers of students coming in now is because they've added those smaller programs like the lacrosses and the men's volleyball team, and now they're going to add shooting sports. Like these are things that the school looks at as ways to get kids to be in extracurricular activities, give them a little bit of a bone to help pay for their tuition, but it gets kids to be a part of the school. And if you just close off the school to only kids that want to go to school and then football and basketball players, I mean, if the school was paying these athletes, you have to find a cut of that to give to the smaller guys. But the smaller guys, they're going to college for, like the lacrosse players are going to college for the education and to have the ability to get a scholarship for playing their sports. I don't think that would change.
Interesting. I think it's such a fascinating thing here because it's such a threat to such an entrenched monopoly that the NCAA has on this stuff that, it's not credible if anybody other than California or, like you say, maybe Texas does this.
Right, exactly.
But if they do it, that's a really credible threat, right?
They have to. I think the NCAA immediately would have to backtrack on this and try to make a compromise, not only with the California schools, but everybody, and say, look, if California's doing this, I know everybody else is going to do it too. This becomes legal. Kids, players, they can benefit from their likeness and what they do for the school as a student athlete, but the schools can no longer. The bagmen are still going to exist. They're still going to be giving guys money under the table, but schools cannot actively be paying players, and I think that's a compromise the NCAA is going to have to make if Governor Newsom in California signs this bill into law.
Yeah, bottom line, it sounds like you think it's probably a just move on behalf of the student athletes.
I can't believe it's taken this long, to be honest with you, but progress, you know how things work. Sometimes it's slow. This is something that needs to happen. It's just fair, Brian. It's just fair. These kids are bringing in millions of dollars to all these universities by playing football games, and they're not getting anything other than what they call scholarships on campus for. Give them a little bit of an opportunity to make something off their likeness, because Brian, you're a father, right? You were a kid here in the state of Iowa for a long time. You look up to the Hawkeyes and the Cyclones. Imagine if, back in the day, if you were a kid in the mid-'90s and you went to an Iowa State football game and Sage Rosenfels was, having a autograph signing at a restaurant afterwards. You want to go meet Sage Rosenfels for $15? Dad would probably have done that for you. Well,
Right.
I think this is a good way to make that a bigger deal and be fair to the athletes.
I knew it was a good idea to bring Emery in. Emery Songer, thank you for bringing your expertise on this one. I knew you'd have an opinion on this.
Anytime, my man.
A real pleasure. We'll be back here in just a moment. I'm Brian Gongol in today for Jeff Angel.